Washington is full of conversations about the future of politics, but there's another story unfolding right now, the future of political journalism. NOTUS has quickly become one of the most talked about newsrooms in Washington. They've attracted some of the best reporters in the business. In fact, two of its newest additions are longtime Capitol Hill journalists Kadia Goba and Paul Kane. Both have spent years covering Congress, talking to lawmakers, staff, and power brokers behind the scenes. So today, we're talking about what's really happening on Capitol Hill, what the rest of us might be missing, and why they believe this is such an exciting moment for journalism. I'm Lisa Camooso Miller, and this is the Friday Reporter. I want to start with the obvious question, and I'll go to Kadia first. Okay, both of you have established careers, long-standing journalism careers. Why NOTUS and why now?
Yeah, great question. So I guess for me, it was an opportunity to work with Kate Nacera and Matt Berman, who are our managing editors. For many people who don't know, they happened to be my editors when I first came to Washington, D.C. in 2019, when I worked for BuzzFeed News. And they've kind of been my in the background editors for the past 7 years. It's been a really formidable relationship. And, I tell them all the time, I knew I was going to work with them eventually one day, just not this soon. But when the opportunity kind of came up it was just really enticing to work with fellows, to work with the just wonderful culture, and to work with the existing and new reporters that were going to come. It was just it's an exciting opportunity that I wanted to take advantage of, especially coming from the Washington Post. Not to put anything down on the Washington Post, but they were kind of going through a different transition. So it was sort of exciting to, enter or come to a place that was maybe growing as opposed to retracting.
Yeah. PK, what about you?
Yeah. For me, it was 19 years and 3 months at the Post. I had reached a point where I expected to retire there, and not retire anytime soon. But the last year and a half had just become a real struggle. Maybe more like a 3-year slide where, the media reports about the Post always these days say, oh, they laid off a third of the staff back in February. The reality is, if you back up a little over 3 years, it started with a round of buyouts, mostly voluntary buyouts, that took about 125 people out of our newsroom at the end of 2023. Flash forward to the summer of 2025, and another 125 or so took buyouts. And then the layoffs of February 4th really became a before-after moment for me, where I went, whoa, there's another 350, 400 that were laid off then. So you're talking about a newsroom that shrank from about 1,000 to 1,100 people back in 2022 to about 400 now. And over those years, I built up a lot of friendships and people who were foreign correspondents who got laid off, people who were on the sports desk, and the Metro desk. And it was just the moment where I realized, this is not the same place anymore. And on that afternoon of February 4th, in my brain, I drew up a list of people that I wanted to talk to about what they do. Who are the smart people in journalism? One of whom is your other podcast companion, Brody Mullins, my friend of 25 years. And then I wanted to talk to some people who do other things, write books. But one of the people I definitely wanted to talk to was Robert Albritton. And Robert, took over his father's TV business, made that incredibly successful, sold that for nearly $1 billion 10, 12 years ago. And he was one of the co-founders of Politico, which is still to this day a financial powerhouse. And he sold that for $1 billion. And he'd been doing this NOTUS thing. So I figured this guy, Robert, must know something about the industry and what's going good and what's going bad. And by the time we sat down for breakfast at a really obscure restaurant in Georgetown, him, Tim Grieve, our top editor on the news side, and me, things had moved already, and things had moved quickly. And I realized what they were trying to build. And one of the cool things is, Kadia said it, it's like a small place that is growing and has ambition and is constantly punching above its weight. We have this team of 20 or so fellows. They're 2-year fellowships where classes of 10 to 12 younger reporters are here, and they're hungry, and they're doing a lot of the breaking news and types of stories that we know are going to happen, which frees up people like Kadia and Reese Gorman to go around and just drop bombs and go find like really, really, really kick-ass stories that other people aren't getting right now. And it's an exciting place for that reason. And I'm really happy. I put my faith in Robert in a lot of ways. Who I've known for a long time, but not that closely. And over the last couple months, I've been really impressed from the top on down.
Well, it's giving everybody in town that is paying attention to journalism and communications a ton of hope. But I want to get on to something that you guys cover every single day, all day long. I will say the one thing about your particular beat is that, PK, you said it right. All around you were seeing your friends go away. Congress and that Congress beat that you guys cover is still, it's a treasure trove. And guys like you breaking news every single day, so fun. Kadia, you spend your days talking to members and staff. What's the biggest thing outside Washington that people misunderstand about Capitol Hill, would you say?
I think people think it's a lot more organized and functional than it actually is. I know when I talk about, think about my friends at home and I'm, telling them about a story I'm working on, they automatically assume some of the questions I ask are like too obvious. And I'm like, no, members of Congress, they actually don't know some of this. I also feel like a lot of people don't realize, and I'm going to give credit to like staffers. Staffers run that building, like the main objective for members are to cast their votes, right? It's their one job, which is why everyone is always really upset when people don't come to work. But you would be surprised how many staffers like make that place run. And you'd also be surprised at how old these staffers are. Some of them as young as 23, early 20s. And as a woman of a certain age, it's been one of the, I came from the fashion industry. So, and everyone, you put your time in 20 something years before you could like get on with the equivalent to like a house floor. So for me, it's astonishing to see like 25-year-olds, like just really doing the thing. So I think it's very surprising to see how people don't understand how Congress actually functions and the meat of it. And I get to witness that every day.
PK, do you think Congress is functioning better than people realize or worse?
Let me get to that. But first, to Kadia's point, my wonderful, amazing girlfriend partner, Kristen, and I, your good friend, Lisa, we went to Ireland back in September. And through a connection through a Irish senator, we got a private tour of their parliament. And it was us and the equivalent of the deputy sergeant at arms. And she was showing us how everything works. And we asked her, like, what happens when it's a cliffhanger vote and it goes on for a while? And she looked at us and said, well, what do you mean? And we said, well, like if there's an outcome and they don't know what's going to happen and there's a vote and there's people, haggling and negotiating. She goes, well, that never happens. And we explained we had just come from the House and Senate of the United States of America, which had multiple like 5, 6, 8, 10-hour votes back in July, end of June and July in the House and Senate because they couldn't figure out whether they were going to pass the big bill. Mm-hmm. And she was blown away. She was like, I don't understand. That never happens here. In terms of functionality and is it functioning better or worse, I do think it's probably worse than most people realize, which is hard to believe when you're like, the last time I looked at the Gallup Congressional approval rating, it was 10% of approval, 86% disapproval. I've never actually met anyone in that 10% who approves, so I don't know who they are. So, I mean, obviously there's a low public opinion of the place, but I don't think the public understands how little is actually getting accomplished on a sort of month-to-month basis, because there's so much noise right now in Congress and in the media that cover Congress. It's all about noise and apparent conflict, and I think that gives off the impression to a lot of people that that there's stuff happening, but in the end, it just kind of turns into noise. And, that last year was the lowest legislative output in terms of laws being sent to a president's desk in his first year in office in the recorded history of Congress. There was one massive bill. It had a lot of stuff crammed into it, but otherwise there wasn't really a whole lot that actually happened. The Senate, 75% of what the Senate does these days is just processing nominations to positions, most of which no one even knew existed until they had to vote on the deputy undersecretary's assistant secretary to the deputy secretary. And so I think that
knew.
Their staffers knew.
Staffers knew.
Kadia, what do you think? I mean, PK said it right. You're breaking news all the time. I loved your sit down with Mr. Jeffries, mostly because it was a lot of Northeast stuff that kids like us really appreciate. But what would you say that we're talking about here? What's a trend either in Congress or on Capitol Hill that's happening here in Washington that maybe the outside world hasn't caught on to yet?
I guess I would focus on maybe the lack of... This is a tricky question, right? Because, I mean, I feel like even less so now, but you would be very surprised how cordial members are to each other from the opposite ends of the aisle. It is very typical to see, let's say, a Democrat or tap, a hard right Republican who they just left committee and kind of nudge them and, tell them a little joke. Some of the that is extremely common. And I think, this is not to say that they don't jump on the respective television shows and then talk trash about each other. But I would say more so than people realize, they are somewhat cordial. Now, again, since January 6th, that has kind of, widened a bit. And you do have many far left versus many far right people not talking. But I would say 40% of members in Congress, these guys have to work. These men and women have to work together all the time. They're pretty collegial with each other. And some of them, I would argue, you'd call them, they would call each other friends. So I think that's very, very surprising. And also I'd add that as much as they attack the us reporters and the media, some of them are extremely cordial, and some of them are our best sources. So even though they're talking about the media, in one sense, they're texting us. So I think that's something that people don't really grasp.
Yeah, I've seen it myself. I mean, when you and I first met, you were chatting and working with members all through the retreat that, when we first became friends, in a way that surprised me. How, regardless. But isn't it politically popular? Is it politically popular, PK, to be anti-reporter? But really, you still have to, these members have to work with you in order to get stories written in the right possible way.
Here's one of the secrets. And I say this in public settings and private settings or not, but the most conservative people in the House of Representatives, the Freedom Caucus members and some of their friends, they are the biggest supporters, allies, whatever you want to call them, to the regular mainstream press. They love us. They feel like they need us to break through. You know, when there's a House vote series that ends on a nice day, they all walk out the steps, and tons of those Freedom Caucus members, they're looking for Manu Raju of CNN and his camera crew, and they go straight down the steps and go right to him, whether it's Nancy Mason or Ralph Norman of South Carolina, used to be Marjorie Taylor Greene. They will go straight to him because they know that all the other mainstream press will then gather around, we'll have these scrums, and they will talk to us. They talk to us in the halls. They give us their phone numbers. You know, if Speaker Johnson ever tried to curtail our access, we have incredible amount of access to run around the Capitol. The Freedom Caucus would revolt and tell him no. They should have their freedom to roam about. But now, I think to Kadea's point, one of the things that is a struggle is that there are 400, House and Senate, throw them all together, probably 450 members who really would like to sort of try to regularly legislate the way it's supposed to be done, maybe even more. But we are just stuck in this reverberation of just bad habits have set in. A few people sabotage things in the House and in the Senate, and nothing gets done. And then we just live off of this deadline where we're going from like one cliff to another. And it's not really big legislation. It's just trying to avoid a big set of tax increases. That's really what that bill did last summer. And so you don't get the normal work happening. And a huge chunk of them really would like to do it, but they don't know how to anymore. Right now, the last two freshman classes in the House produced 70 and 63 people. If my Googling is right, we already are at, I think, 65 members who are retiring this time. And that's before you have anyone who's defeated. So you're going to have a freshman class of more than 80 total. So you're talking like close to half of the new Congress in January 2027 will have only served 4 years or less at that moment. You know, there's been a lot of changeover. The one good thing about that is these newcomers that I'm talking about, 22, 24, and the 26 classes, they weren't here on January 6th, and they don't have some of the same residual scar tissue from that day. And maybe they can sort of form bonds that can kind of break the logjam across the parties.
That's an interesting thought. And boy, wouldn't that be great? What do you think when you think about good congressional reporting? Has the entry of social media made it harder or easier to cover the Congress?
I'll answer that. I'll start. I think it makes it harder. Everyone is a reporter on all the social media platforms. A lot of people pose as reporters. And I bring this up very often. Many people don't have news literacy, so they can't distinguish what actual reporting is versus like someone just having a or what they perceive as a smart take. People would be stunned how long it takes me to get like a graph together when I have to verify it with several people who aren't getting back to me, even though I know I've heard it from some person. You know, just quality reporting calls on you getting multiple, sources for a story or a specific graph. So it's a lot of energy that that reporters actually put into it. And I think people who are on the internet or on X in particular, and Facebook, I guess, are kind of just stringing along their thoughts, and they have this weird perception. People have this weird perception that they are newsmakers. I come across it all the time from my friends in Brooklyn who really, and they're like my age, and they really can't distinguish news from non-news. And forget about if you're behind a paywall, right? It's just like
Yeah.
stuff just
You're
doesn't get
invisible.
through. And they
Yeah.
don't read past headlines. So I'm
Yeah.
through with complaining about like
No,
readers.
I actually don't hear that as a complaint. I hear it as really thoughtful. And I think about that when you say news literacy. I've heard that phrase before, but that really, to me, that illuminated quite a bit of what I've been trying to unpack. PK, what do you say about the entry of social media?
You know, my first week at the Washington Post was the first week of Nancy Pelosi, Steny Hoyer, Jim Clyburn Leadership 1.0, January 2007. And I was writing a blog about Congress, and it was considered sort of revolutionary to have a blog. Chris Cillizza had started a politics blog a little bit before me at the Post, and it was all so weird and foreign, and like the internet got better at helping get news out there to a broader readership. And that was great. And Twitter helped do that as well. But it also has an accelerant to stupid news or dumb things or hot takes. And this, this device has just, radicalized everybody. And, there will be a member soon, or maybe it'll be a reporter or a staffer who has a very serious injury tumbling down the House steps, because every time a vote series ends, there's upwards of 30 different members who walk out, and on the House steps, they take out their phones and they start filming to, get their take on the last vote immediately out to their supporters, and their staffers are then taking it and bouncing it around to their social media networks. And again, that's good that they can get their views out there, but it also makes them, in a way, think they're their own newscaster.
Yeah.
Ted Cruz often will look at reporters and say, "You should go listen to my podcast." This podcast is like 70 minutes long. Like, I don't have time for that.
No, there's not enough time for any of that. But I'm sure it is one thing that I would say that is happening, to your point about news literacy, to your point about there is an owned channel that just about everyone is leaning into now, because it is so difficult to get their own story told, especially if they're not the guy who's in the White House. And that gets me to my last question. I'd like to end with a prediction. Okay, I'm not holding you to it. I mean, I'll make you buy me a beer. That's good enough. 1 year from now, what's the congressional story we'll all be talking about?
Oh, boy.
I think it's whether Democrats take the House or not, I think it's going to be the relationship between Hakeem Jeffries and Donald Trump or this administration, no matter what. Even if they don't take the House, I think that becomes a story, because obviously Democrats will be looking ahead to 2028. He'll probably be posturing differently. Who knows if the tides change and they start doing like weird investigations off-site if they don't actually take the House. If they take the House, obviously we can expect all of that. But I think it'll be the relationship with this leadership, this Dem leadership, and the president.
That's interesting.
I think I'm going to presuppose that the Democrats take the majority in answering this question. And the idea being, will the House go back to functioning the way it did under the iron fist leadership of Nancy Pelosi and Steny Hoyer and Jim Clyburn? Or does it kind of continue on the way it's going now, in which there's constantly flare-up rebellions from the far right and like taking down things like parliamentary rules votes, or the moderates and signing on to discharge petitions with Democrats? Those are the sort of things that never used to happen and only started happening in this past 3.5 years. And now they happen with regularity. I think there's a discharge petition vote coming in this week. And so there's a lot of Democrats who just assume, okay, well, it'll go back to normal the way it was when Nancy, Steny, and Jim were running things. But a different Democrat, a younger Democrat, said to me, he gave me those figures about the number of people who will have only been here in the post-Pelosi world. And we're talking about 70, 63. We're up to about 135 or so on, that's from both sides of the aisle. You're getting another 80, 85. There are going to be a lot of Democrats in that group who just never experienced the normal functioning of the House of Representatives. And do they, defer to their leadership the way Democrats did under Pelosi? Or is it just little small rebellion here and there? And Jeffries is constantly under fire in the same way that McCarthy and Johnson have been for 3.5 years.
Well, I think the one thing I'm going to take away is that you have job security, because Congress is never going to stop being interesting. I'm so grateful to both of you. Thank you. Thank you for joining me.
Thanks for
Thank
having
you.
me.
Thank you to Kadia Goba and Paul Kane. One of the things I enjoy most about talking with journalists is that they're often hearing the conversations long before the rest of us do. And as Congress wrestles with some of the biggest issues facing the country, reporters like Kadia and Paul help us understand not just what's happening, but what's coming next. If you enjoyed today's conversation, be sure to subscribe to the Friday Reporter wherever you get your podcasts. You can find us on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, and Spotify to start. You can also find some more conversations with journalists, communicators, policymakers, and advocates shaping the national conversation. I'm Lisa Camooso Miller. Thanks for listening.